All right, well, shall we go ahead and get started now?
Let's do it.
Okay. Well, let me start with an introduction to Canna Advisors. And for those of you who are already working with Canna Advisors or have spoken to us, this will be a repeat, but it's worth for those who have not heard it. Canna Advisors were headquartered in Boulder, Colorado. That's where our founding partners, Jay and Diane Zarkowski, opened their first medical marijuana dispensary along with 2 cultivation facilities way back in 2009, ancient history in the cannabis world. And in spite of how cannabis has grown and in both use and acceptance, 2009 was early in the process, and even Boulder, Colorado was a hostile environment. So they were very much proponents of medical cannabis and knew they had to become advocates as well to help the industry grow. So Jay and Diane were founding members of the National Cannabis Industry Association. They're lifetime members of the Arcview Investment Group. Diane was a founding benefactor for the organization Woman Grow, and that list goes on. And it was through that work as advocates, and also Colorado was the first state to successfully implement regulations, so they grew up within that regulated market. They started getting inquiries from people in other states looking to get into the legal cannabis industry. So in 2012, they took on a client in Connecticut. Connecticut was only issuing 4 cultivation licenses for the entire state, and they won one of those 4 licenses. That license just a few years ago sold for $80 million. Not bad for client number 1. But that's how Canna Advisors was born. Very organic. It wasn't planned. It was a need, and they started filling it. Here we are over a decade later. Canna Advisors has worked in 38 US states as well as internationally. It's a highly academic team. Our CFO has an advanced degree in economics. We have multiple attorneys. Our technical writing team includes 2 published authors. And importantly, we also have former operators on the team who've actually done it. And I think that's one of the distinguishing factors of Canna Advisors. We're not just a company that understands the regulations. We're a company with real world experience. We bring the cannabis industry experience into our realm so that as people are looking to get their businesses up and running, we can not only guide you through the application process, we can do it in a way that positions you to be successful once you're up and operating. Little personal information. I'm into my 8th year with Canna Advisors. Prior to Canna Advisors, I've been at the VP level for multiple companies, both small and large, public and private, doing business development and strategic placements. I can tell you without a doubt the years with Canna Advisors have been the funnest years of my professional career. So with that, I'll hand it over to Summer so she can tell you a little bit about her background.
All right. Thanks a bunch, Bob. As Bob said, my name's Summer Thomas. I'm the Director of Regulatory Operations here at Canna Advisors. I've been here just exactly 5 years now. It's my 5-year canniversary this week, as we call it. So I've worked in dozens of states across the US, helping folks launch their legal cannabis businesses. I'm an attorney by education, recovering attorney, as they call it. So bring that legal background. I have a background in tax and business law. I'm a member of the National Cannabis Industry Association on the state regulations committee there, and part of the International Cannabis Bar Association. Also really like to volunteer for Expunge Colorado, a great group locally here in Colorado that works with social equity causes. So love doing that, and personally love to hike and ski and hang out here in the mountains of Colorado. Well, I'll leave it at that. I think that's probably about good for me.
Perfect. So one thing we also want to mention is Summer is based in Colorado. I moved out to New York about 2 years ago as the East Coast began legalizing very quickly. So I run our New York office. But we've been very active in following Minnesota since the early days, since the 2014 legalization of medical. We watched closely with the dance with adult use back in 2019, where it barely missed. And then congratulations, finally happened this year and finally coming to fruition. And we find it very important to stay in tune with attorneys, lobbyists, and government officials in each state because you can learn an insight into what's going to happen in the program above and beyond what you can read, what the state might actually release. I had the opportunity a month or so ago to meet with Senator Port, who drafted the Senate bill. I've met with Chris Thokels from the Department of Health, and both were extremely supportive of the program, which is great to see. And so it's good to see a state where they're really taking their time and trying to do things right, and with the support of the state. During the coming months, we're going to learn more about the timeline and the program itself. And one of the benefits we'll be able to bring from Canna Advisors is being able to compare what Minnesota is doing with what we've seen in the other 37 states we've worked. Because it's very easy for us to look at things that are happening in Minnesota and compare it and say, well, that's similar to what New York did, and this is how it turned out. Or that's similar to Ohio did it, and this is what happened there. So we not only get to see what they're planning on doing, we can apply some real world filters and predict how it's going to turn out in the future. Move on to the next slide.
All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about the timeline then. Bob covered a little bit of just up until now, but let's talk a little bit about what we've seen here in the Minnesota market and what we expect to see going forward. So I always like to set the stage a little bit with what's happened leading up to here. I mean, I think especially Minnesota has an interesting backstory when it comes to the medical market being rolled out, and then not getting flower into the medical market until just last year. And then the low potency bill, 15172, coming out last year, and that having a little bit of confusion coming along with that. The low potency edibles that were then allowed, and those sales that started in May of this year. So, folks on the ground in Minnesota are seeing all kinds of cannabis products, those low potency products, coming out all over the place. And then, as we all know, in May this year, the bill was signed to start the adult use program and get that signed into law. And in August 1st, the bill took effect, and took effect in regards to legalizing possession, but it didn't yet get that retail market or the sales rolled out, right? We still are waiting for those regulations to get those things underway, and we'll talk a lot more about that later. One other date to look at is that October 1st deadline for the registration for the low potency products and the hemp derived products. Also, the executive director is going to be selected for the OCM, for the office that's overseeing the program, the Office of Cannabis Management. So just in a couple of weeks, the governor should be selecting the executive director to lead the program, as well as selecting the Cannabis Advisory Council. That should be going on throughout the fall, that they'll be selecting folks for that advisory council, as well as positions are listed for other roles in the OCM to fill out that office. And so they can get things up and running, get the regulations going, and get this all rolled out. One other date that we're looking at is January 15th, 2024. The office will be releasing a study and report that's going to estimate the demand and the number and geographic distribution of cannabis businesses. So essentially, an overview of the demand on the market, maybe the number of licenses, and that'll be coming out January of 2024. So coming out here soon. And then we also have heard that it's been the projected timeline of the state for January 2025 to be the date for initial sales. This is actually, as Bob was saying, compared to other markets, much longer than most states would wait from passing the bill to legalizing possession, to then rolling out retail sales. So really taking their time, and they were at the OCM presentation last week. There was a public meeting. They gave a presentation, and they were really, really adamant that they just wanted the public to be involved in this process, that they want to do it right, that they really want to be careful with it. And it does seem that they have the resources and the attention, and they're going to put the diligence toward it that it deserves to get the regulations together. So if you haven't listened to that OCM meeting recording, I definitely would recommend it. It was very enlightening. And then also, when the regulations do start coming out, they'll be coming out with a 30-day comment period. So you will be able to comment on any regulations. And then final regulations, we're expecting those final regulations to be out towards the end of 2024, for all of those to be finalized. And there's a whole slew of different regulations that the office is going to be putting together. So right now there's a little bit of conflict, though, that we're seeing between the dates that are given for when the apps might come out and the date that they want retail sales to start. Right now, they're both sitting right around January 2025 or the first quarter of 2025. So I think that the OCM has just kind of trying to under promise, over deliver, saying that it may take this long for the regulations, but they're going to be working in the interim to do everything they can to get the regulations out and moving, and especially be having these public comments and public feedback periods so that they can put together the best regulations possible. All right, so I think that's probably enough for our timeline. Let me pass the mic over to Bob to just cover a little more details from the statutes, specifically starting with our license types.
Sure. So let me start with a high-level overview of license types in the cannabis industry for those of people that might be new to the industry. Cannabis licenses typically fall into three buckets. The first one being cultivation, which is just what it sounds like. It is the cultivation of cannabis plants. It is commercial grade agriculture. It tends to have a higher initial investment because you have to build a facility. There is outdoor allowed in Minnesota, but given the growing season there, that'll be limited. So an indoor facility is quite an investment, but it is typically a healthy business if you can operate it right. The second facet is manufacturing, and that's taking that plant matter and turning it into any number of consumer products and packaging it. This is often the value add portion of the industry. It's where branding typically takes place. So you're making a product, you're packaging it, you're putting a brand on it, and if you're good at creating a brand, you can sell that product throughout the state. So there's a lot of opportunity in that manufacturing sector. The investment is completely dependent upon how you're going to manufacture, what you're going to manufacture, and how much. So there can be a fairly small facility. If you're going to buy extracted oil from another manufacturer and make a certain edible, you can have a fairly small facility. But if you're going to do it all from extraction to making multiple products, that's a much larger facility. Then the third facet is retail sales, and that's exactly what it sounds like. You're taking those products that are packaged, grown by the cultivators, packaged by the manufacturers, and you're selling it to consumers. Retail cannabis can be closely compared to operating a restaurant. It's all about maintaining proper operating procedures, staying compliant, and managing your staff. Those are really the keys to operating retail. And just like a restaurant, your initial investment is going to be dependent on how big and how fancy you want to go. You can have a small, very plain dispensary, or you can have a showcase dispensary that you try to make a destination location. So the expense of getting into retail is going to be up to you. Now, most states have more than just three license types, and that's because there are some peripheral businesses such as delivery and testing lab, or they'll have combination licenses that allow you to do more than one function. So that's where the license types in Minnesota come in. And I'm going to go through them in the numbers that they use in the regulations or the law that was passed. And we're also going to focus on the 10 licenses that pertain to adult use cannabis. There are additional licenses for hemp and medical cannabis, but we'll save them for another time. If you have any questions on those licenses, reach out. We're more than happy to answer those questions. So the first license type mentioned in the law is called a cannabis microbusiness. And a microbusiness allows you to do all three things. You can cultivate up to 5,000 square feet of canopy, that's flowering canopy. You can manufacture that plant matter into products, and you can retail it through one retail location. You can also have a lounge license with a micro license in Minnesota, which adds a little fun. For cultivation, it's 5,000 square feet of flowering canopy or a half acre outdoor. And there are some licenses. The only other license you can hold if you have a micro license is an event organizer license. The next license is similar. It's a meso license, and it is the same thing. You're allowed to do all three, but it's on a larger scale. You can have up to 15,000 square feet of flowering canopy indoor or an acre outdoor, and you can have up to 3 retail locations. You cannot have a lounge license, as it's written so far, with that meso, but you can also be a cannabis, medical cannabis retailer as well. And you can also be an event organizer license. So those are the 2 vertical licenses that are available in Minnesota. And when I spoke to the state officials, they explained that they want to avoid large multi-state operators coming in and dominating the industry. And that's why they're preventing vertical integration, meaning you can do all 3 things, except for these 2 licenses. Most of your large industry operators are not going to be excited about having a 15,000 square foot cultivation in 3 stores. They tend to go a lot larger than that. So that's going to leave these licenses to local businesses, people who care about the community and want to get these businesses up and running. After the meso business, it goes into cannabis cultivator. Cultivator can have up to 30,000 square feet of plant canopy or 2 acres of outdoor, and they can sell that to other licensed cannabis businesses. A cultivator can also manufacture. They can get a manufacturing license. They can get a medical cannabis manufacturing license. They can get licensed to grow industrial hemp, and they can be an event organizer. The real separator here is you cannot do that and have a retail. So you could cultivate and get a manufacturing license, but you cannot retail. License number 4 is manufacturer. That allows you to take the plant matter, turn it into any number of products, and sell it to licensed retailers. There is one thing I saw in the regulations that was unique to Minnesota that I'll mention here. So a manufacturer in Minnesota can buy their plant matter from any of the licensed cultivators. It also says in the law that a manufacturer in Minnesota can accept cannabis flower from unlicensed persons who are at least 21 years of age, provided that the cannabis manufacturer does not accept more than 2 ounces from an individual on a single occasion. That is unique. We don't see that in other states. Not sure how that will play out, but it's in there. So again, a manufacturer can also have a cultivator license, the medical cannabis cultivator license, medical processor, an event organizer, but no retail. And then you have the retailer. The retailer can buy from any licensed manufacturer or cultivator and sell to consumers. A retailer may also hold a delivery event organizer and a delivery license. Then there's a cannabis wholesaler, and the wholesaler can buy from licensed cannabis businesses and sell to retailers. And this is a little bit redundant. Some states have a tiered system where cultivators and manufacturers can only sell to a wholesaler who can then sell to retailers. In Minnesota, it's more of an open market. A cultivator and a manufacturer can sell directly to retailers, or they can sell to a wholesaler who can sell to retailers. And that will come into play. There will be cultivators and manufacturers who do not want to run a sales force. They'll just sell it to a wholesaler who will then be responsible for selling it. Or there'll be instances where a wholesaler can get a bulk purchase on, let's say, immature plants, and then resell them to cultivators, micro businesses, meso businesses, and even to retailers. So there will be a need for that wholesaler license. There's a cannabis transporter license, and that allows the holder to transport cannabis and hemp products between the licensed businesses. This will be needed. The only exception to needing a transporter is if you have a cultivator and a manufacturer under the same roof. So even if you own the two businesses, if they're not under the same roof, you would need to utilize a transporter to get the product from one to the other. A transporter can also have a delivery service and an event organizer license. Testing facility, just what it sounds like. You're getting samples from the different licensed businesses, you're testing it to meet state requirements and providing the results. If you have a testing license, you may not own, operate, be employed by any cannabis or hemp business. It has to be standalone, and for reasons that are obvious. Event organizer, I've mentioned this several times. It seems to be the one that just about everybody can have. An event organizer can organize a temporary cannabis event lasting no more than 4 days. There are a lot of stipulations as to what can and can't happen at those events, but this is a really good addition to the program. It's going to create a lot of opportunity for festivals and events to have cannabis participants. And it's great to see Minnesota start with that right from the beginning. We've seen other states take years to let their programs mature before they issue licenses like this. And 10th, delivery service. Delivery service, they can purchase cannabis and hemp products from any licensed business. Oh, excuse me. They have to purchase it from those licensed to retail. So they purchase it from those licensed to retail, and they can deliver and sell it to consumers. That's a delivery license. So those are the 10 kinds. As you begin to strategize about what you want to do in this evolving industry, it's important to think about the resources you have, the expertise that you have, and then pick a direction that gets you excited, but also something that you can actually achieve and be successful at.
Yeah, definitely.
What's the...
All right, so let's talk then a little bit about the, let's see, I'm going to talk a little bit about license amounts first before we get to ownership and transfer. Just a little bit about the number of licenses right now. It's somewhat unknown, but it is anticipated based on what we know from the statutes that we will have license limits. The statute says that the Office of Cannabis Management will issue the necessary number of licenses. Hasn't said exactly how many, but it will be some necessary number to meet the demand and provide market stability and ensure competition and limit unregulated sales. So as I mentioned before, we'll be on the lookout for that January 15th, 2024 report and maybe any data leading up to that to give us an idea of what the state is going to issue for the number of licenses. So right now we're not sure of the limits, and the only number we know related to license limits is that there must be at least one retailer for every 12,500 people in a city or in a local government area. So for example, that means there would be at least 34 licenses in Minneapolis, 24 in St. Paul, 10 or about 10 in Rochester. So we'll probably get some more information from that report, at least I would expect it, on potentially the number of licenses or what the demand that the office is expecting is going to be. So we're looking forward to that. And then right now, the current medical market is fairly small with only those 2 producers and 15 retail locations. So not a whole lot of competition existing in the market as it stands. And it seems that these medical operators aren't going to get first bite at the market like we've seen in a lot of other places where the medical operators just get to immediately start retail sales. as soon as the market's open. So looks like that's not going to be the case here. All right, so let's talk then a little bit about some ownership and transfer restrictions. As Bob mentioned, verticals aren't allowed except for mesos and micros. So that's similar actually to the alcohol industry, and similar to the structure that we've seen New York take in their recent program rollout. We've actually seen Minnesota follow New York's lead in a few ways in the statute, but hopefully they stop there. As we all know, New York's having a little bit of having a few hiccups right now in their program rollout. But similar to the alcohol industry in that they have the retailers and the production separated, right? They don't want to create these full vertical monster businesses. They want to have that separation between the retail storefronts and the production. Let's see. All right, so talking then about license transfer. So licenses will be able to be transferred freely. Of course, you will have to have the approval of the office. And you do want to note that social equity licenses are only going to be able to be transferred to other social equity owners. And then at the local level, you'll also have to get a license registration, and those registrations actually cannot be transferred per the statute. So you'll have to re-register at the local level. And then a few of these that I found interesting in the statutes, these are requirements for getting a new license. So if your business converts its legal structure to a different type, you'll have to get a new license for the statute. If there's a reorg, a merger, bankruptcy, insolvency, any of these types of things, you'd have to get a new license. Kind of interesting there. And then also the statute says that a licensee can petition to adjust their tier. So usually we would see this as like a cultivation where maybe you had 20,000 square feet of flowering canopy, you could raise to the next tier of 30,000 or something like that. Right now there aren't tiers listed on the license category, so maybe it's a different kind of tier they're talking about, or maybe we're going to see tiers come down the road in the regulations potentially. So we'll see there about that. One other thing to note here on transfer is that the office can allow the relocation of your licensed premises. So you may be able to change your location of your business, and that won't affect your license. So you won't have to get a new license just if you change your location, as long as you follow the correct procedures that are laid out by the office.
One other thing when it comes to license types and unique to Minnesota is the law provides for a municipality or a county to own a retail location. And that we have not seen in any other states. There are states that have state-owned liquor stores, so it's not without precedent, but it's certainly unique in cannabis. I can tell you, we've probably talked to 100+ people across the state of Minnesota. We've only talked to one municipality to date. So I don't know that will be commonplace, but it is unique to Minnesota.
Definitely.
All right, what's the next?
On to the next.
Social equity. Okay, this is very important. Most states attempt to create a social equity program that can help repair some of the damage that's been done by prohibition. Obviously, there are communities that have been disproportionately impacted, and trying to engage those communities into the legal market is a noble cause. Some states have done it well, some have done it not so well. But it's very important if you're going to pursue a license, you understand how social equity plays into it. In the law, it states that social equity must account for 20% of the total available points. That's huge. In most states, licenses can be won and lost, not just by a single point, but sometimes even by a fraction of a point. So getting every single point you can get is important. There are 7 ways listed in the law to qualify as social equity. I won't get into great detail here because there are nuances to it. If you have a question of whether or not you're social equity, often that's better submitted to a local attorney because it's usually based on a prior conviction or some other information. But the long and short of it is your social equity, if you were convicted of a cannabis offense, possession of cannabis, if you had a parent, guardian, child, spouse, or dependent who was convicted, if you are a veteran who lost honorable status due to cannabis offense, that's unique to Minnesota. We haven't seen it based on cannabis discharge. If you've been a resident of a disproportionately impacted area for the last 5 years, emerging farmers, and then there's some number 7 is if you've been a resident for the last 5 years, and it goes into some income requirements. So if you're in an area that had a poverty level that was 20% or more, the median family income did not exceed 80%. So there's a couple different situations there. But what it comes down to is if you or an immediate family member, in particular, parent, guardian, child, or spouse, had a cannabis conviction, discharge, honorable status change due to cannabis, you currently live in a disproportionately impacted area, you're an emerging farmer, or you qualify based on the income level. That's not that different from what other states have done. But Minnesota has added one little twist to that. In addition to having those very cut and dry qualifications, they also say you can submit an individual impact plan. And that they will allow applicants to demonstrate the impact of cannabis prohibition has had on the applicant. And they will score that. They will see if that's worthy of getting some points. So either you want to try to find a way to have social equity people on your team, or you want to figure out how it has impacted you so you can submit an individual impact plan. A big difference between Minnesota and what we've seen in other states is this is not a pass, fail, all or nothing point system. In Illinois, for example, it was similar. It was about 20% of the total points, and you had to submit evidence that you were social equity, and you either were or you weren't, and you got all of those points. In Minnesota, they're going to determine the points considering the number of members or ownership percentage who qualify as social equity applicants. So if you have 100% ownership by social equity and you qualify under one of the 7, you're likely to get all of those points. It's going to come down if there's a smaller percentage. And again, comparing to Illinois, in Illinois, if you were 51% owned by social equity qualifiers, you were social equity. So the target here is to have as much of your company owned by people who qualify as social equity, or have a impact plan where you can get some of those points. There is an additional impact to that. In other states, if you did or didn't get those points, could determine whether or not you got the license. Because this will be a scale, some people who have social equity won't get all the points. So even if you're not social equity, if you score well on the rest of the application, you have a potential of getting in there and still getting a license. Because you're not automatically going to get those 20% points just because you have some social equity. And we work with our clients to help strategize how to get as many points possible.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hope I didn't beat that to death, but I can't reiterate how important it is that you consider that and push to get social equity on your application.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's such an opportunity because most states say it's either 51% ownership or nothing. Well, okay, you could have maybe just 5 or 10% ownership and get at least some points if that's the best, you can get. At least get something on there and you can still get some points from it. And then try to make up for it on these other point areas of the application, which I will go into next. And then especially that individual impact plan that Bob mentioned is really interesting. We've not seen that in other states, to have a section that's graded the same as a social equity section, but you get to just write a narrative description of how it has impacted you. So a very subjective, it sounds like, criteria for that one. Okay, so in addition to this, Yeah,
just a note, it's not social equity if you say I was impacted because I could not get good weed before it was legal. That's just telling you now,
that
that's
won't
not a
count.
social impact.
We'll help you figure out what counts. Um, all right. So in addition to those social equity points, there are also going to be points given out for, at least we know of, 10 other categories that are going to have points assigned. So the next is status as a veteran or retired National Guard applicant who doesn't meet the definition of social equity. So you could have the social equity points, and in addition to the social equity points, you can have veteran points. In addition to those for your ownership team. And then the other points are more in regards to your plans that you're putting together. So security and record keeping plan, employee training plans, business plans, as well as your financial situation. So usually wanting to know how much money it's going to take for this project and what your funding sources are, what your funding plans are, your labor and employment practices, knowledge and experience, environmental plan. And then also the office can award points to an application if you would expand service to an underrepresented market. And that can include the medical cannabis program. So kind of interesting there. Not sure if they'll open up medical licenses or have some way that folks can apply for an adult use and a medical license perhaps at the same time for a retailer. We'll see how that might come out in the regulations. But kind of interesting there. And then the last one being that individual impact statement, which I already mentioned, and that's going to be scored the same as the social equity points. So a lot of sections that we already know about in this competitive process. Usually we have to wait until the regulations come out to get more information on some of the scoring or application sections. So we have a good amount of information here, but the regulations are going to give more details on the specific application timing, the format of the application, if there are any page restrictions or font, or whether you can include colors or your logos or pictures or things like that, as well as all of the procedures. We know a little bit of the procedure now, but obviously we'll need a lot more of the detail there. Some of the procedures we know right now, the office is working on their software system so that they can accept the applications via an online portal, and also be able to accept comments through the during the public comment period via that online portal. So that's what we're working on right now. Then we'll have a submission period where you'll submit via that online portal. After submission, there'll be a deficiency period. So if there's anything missing from your application, you'll have 10 days to cure that. Then we'll go on to the grading period. And it does say in the statute that within 90 days of receiving a completed application and background checks, that the office will either issue or reject, and give reasons if they do reject. 90 days is a pretty quick turnaround period for application grading for a full merit process, and to make the awards. For example, Alabama just closed their application period. It took them from January to June to award the licenses, and they wound up making mistakes and had to re-award them actually in August. So it does take time to grade applications, and if you don't take your time, mistakes can be made. So I would say another thing that we can expect to see is a rubric coming out. So in the regulation, something that lays out not just that these sections will be for points, but how many points will each section be worth? Will there be any weight to any specific sections? And just more details into what to expect from each section. But right now we do have a decent amount of information of what to expect. And in addition to just the points, the statute also lays out some of the application contents are going to be within those plans, within those points. So some of those additional application contents are going to be a description of the location, security plan, business plan. And within that, you'll have to have the expected size of your business and the growth of your business, record keeping, knowledge and experience of your team, really anyone who's going to be managing or an owner of the team, your environmental plan, and then all those financial components as well. One interesting thing is you'll have to get an attestation from a labor organization regarding a labor peace agreement. And then you'll have to also show your funding sources used to finance the business. And I think, as I said earlier, you'll want to show your work on that so that you can show the state why you are raising this much money, or why you need this much money to fund the project, and then your plan to make that happen. Also, employee training, business policies that will ensure compliance. And then for all license types, you'll have to have an operating plan, the proposed layout of the facility. And then there are a few other additional license-specific requirements. For example, the cultivation plan for any operators that'll be cultivating, that has to include your water usage, recycling, waste disposal, and your pest management as well. So really lots of information and things to get working on, as the state is working through the regulations. Applicants can also be working through building their plans, building their business, making sure they have the right knowledge and experience, and just getting all of these things lined up so that you can get as many points as possible. And then just kind of one thing as a reminder, as you're planning out your business, is to keep in mind is that your application commitments are an ongoing condition of your licensure. So you do want to do well. You do want to do the best you can in your application, but you don't want to promise the moon. You don't want to promise something that you can't actually put into action, because your license depends on it, right? So really keep it realistic when it comes to your application. Do the best you can while still keeping it realistic. And then one other thing to note is that we do know that the local government is part of the application process. So that once you submit your application, it's going to go to the local government. They're going to have a chance to give their input on your application. Mainly, it's going to probably be about property, about zoning, making sure that your property fits in with the local plan, but not necessarily exclusively. So make sure that you are getting a close connection with the local government, and that you're not, overlooking that, because really all the points do matter here. It's a competitive process, and as we've talked about, there are a lot of very kind of interesting ways they've looked at social equity that are going to, they really give a lot of opportunity for a lot of different applicants. So let's see, I think I've covered it about all there. Let's go to the next slide.
All right, what you should be doing today. Just do this real quick. Change. Okay. So right now, this is the time to get moving and working on all of the foundational material and the base of what will serve as your eventual application. We always find those groups that take the most time or have the most time to prepare end up scoring better than those that rush at the end. So right now, typically we suggest clients start out with financial modeling. And very early in that, you should strategize as to what license type or types you want to pursue. And then build out detailed financial modeling of what it's going to cost to get that business up and running, what it's going to cost to operate, the potential revenues. That's all important to have, even just to make that go, no-go decision of whether this is the right business for you. If you find that it's going to cost you a lot more to get this business operating than you had anticipated, you need to know that now. So financial modeling, step number one. Then you're going to need a business plan that explains how you're going to make that happen. And the business plan, typically a written narrative, ultimately serves as the foundation for the submission. In the business plan, you're going to start making decisions about who your team is, how you're going to operate, what's going to make you different than other businesses, what's your community impact plan, what's your diversity plan, what's the SWOT analysis? I mean, these are all things that will eventually play into all of the information submitted. So it's a good way to get started. Application strategy, are you going to, what type of business, how big of a business? If you're going to do a manufacturer, there's a ton of strategy, same with cultivator. Are you going to build it all at once, or are you going to build it in phases? So those are things we're working on today with multiple clients, and getting those in place gives you more time to then go look for real estate. When you have a financial model in a written business plan and you're talking to potential landlords, it shows that you're real, you know what you're doing. Community. Seeking local approval, as Summer mentioned, is very important. So the state is going to send that application to the municipality for their input. They're going to say that building works or it doesn't work, but they also have the ability to weigh in with an opinion. So you want them to say, this is a group we really think should have a license. And so starting to go to your community meetings, your community board meetings, get to know the board, make sure they're supportive. And then ultimately having all of the pieces of the puzzle pulled together before the application comes out. You want that body of knowledge already sitting there so that when the application comes out, you can spend that time polishing it and customizing it based on the scoring rubric and the format that the state submitted so that you can get every single point possible. So that's what we're suggesting people be working on now. And it's not too soon to start. There's also, as Summer mentioned, we have some insight from the state as to a timeline, but they really look like they're setting expectations so that they potentially can exceed those expectations. And we'll know that in the coming weeks as we watch different positions on the OCM get filled. How quickly are they moving? And we'll start to get some additional information. But if that app comes out, middle of next year, you better have all of that ready at that point in time. Summer, anything to add?
I think that about covers it. Yeah. I mean, there's just lots to do to prepare, and we're lucky with a lot of information in the statute that we can start preparing off of, in addition to what we know from other states. Yeah, really a lot of work to be done, and Minnesota's done a great job of giving us a lot of upfront information here, and I'm looking forward to all of the public sessions that they're going to be having and getting the opportunity to be involved and collaborate with the state in the regulation drafting process.
So right on schedule, 10 minutes for Q&A. Is that
perfect? Yeah. And then additionally, just that last slide there, stay updated. Canna Advisors resources. We always have information coming out on our blog about information on the state. We're always staying abreast of the news. Definitely you'll want to update yourself on the OCM website if you haven't had a chance to look over the state's website. Also to listen to that recording of the meeting I mentioned from last week. That's a great resource there. And then just randomly, Marijuana Moment, always a great one to read in the morning just to stay up to date on all the news in the cannabis industry, Minnesota and elsewhere. And then let's see, events coming up. Only one we have coming up right now, I think, is October, the Cannabis Quality Conference. And I will be there speaking on market expansion, and Jay Zarkowski, our co-founder, will be there as well. That one's going to be in New Jersey.
All right. Well, if anybody has any questions, feel free to enter them in the Q&A button on the top of the screen. We'll give a few minutes in case there's slow typers out there. And if we have no questions, I suppose we'll move on.
We've answered them all.
That's how you know it's a good webinar.
That's what I'll think, at least.
Yes.
Okay.
And certainly if you have questions that arise after the webinar, just submit an inquiry on our website, give us a call, shoot us an email. This is what we do all day long. All right.
I'll throw it out there also. I see a couple of our IAP partners on the line, or our vendor partners. If you are interested in doing work in Minnesota in particular, or if your business is headquartered in Minnesota, reach out. We're always vetting different vendors to see if they're a good fit or if they can be beneficial to our clients. So if you are a vendor on the line looking to work in Minnesota, feel free to also reach out. We're happy to chat.
And I see Brandon is asking for an expected timeline on the application submission. Summer, do you want to address that one?
Yeah. So as of right now, we've had, a couple conflicting dates. I think at first the state had said it was going to be Q1 of 2024 is when they were thinking they were going to try to process applications. And now it's seeming like it's not going to be until maybe more end of 2024 for the actual application portal and applications to be released. But as Bob said, the state seems like they're trying to sort of under promise, over deliver here and just say, hey, we have this much time to do it. Let's make sure that we're doing it right. But I do think that they're still trying to hit that January 2025, or sorry, first quarter of 2025 date to begin retail sales. So if we want to begin retail sales in the first quarter of 2025, then we're going to need to get the applications going a little bit, sooner than that same quarter.
Yeah, and
so
let
I
me
would say
mention,
probably. Yeah, go ahead, Bob.
One other thing from my discussions with some state officials, they indicated they would like to do a staggered application process where they open the window first for cultivators because it takes time for cultivators to build their facilities, get their crops in the ground, and then second, open the window for manufacturers so they can build their facilities, and third, open it for retailers. It's a much shorter process to get a retail facility built out and running, but there's no need to get it running until there's a supply chain. So we're likely to see cultivator and probably meso and micro get their cultivation endorsements at that first, and then manufacturing, and then retail.
Yeah, and I wish there was a more exact answer to that question.
So when it comes to the state wanting to keep this more local businesses and not letting the MSOs come in, part of the strategy there was to limit vertical integration. Most of your larger multi-state operators prefer to come into a state, build a huge cultivation facility, 100,000 square feet or larger, and open up as many stores as they can. By only allowing the micro and the meso to be vertical, that by itself kind of puts a throttle or a bottleneck on the multi-state operators. And then the second thing is giving up to 20% of your points for being a social equity applicant makes it easier for people who are in the state, because you either have to have that conviction, you have to be living in one of those zones for 5 of the last years. And so that's going to make it very hard for MSOs to come in and qualify for any social equity points, which is going to be a deterrent to their scoring. So it's structured overall. There's nothing in the law that says there will be no MSOs. They've just made it very difficult for them to come in and be dominant in the market. And that goes for out-of-state applicants as well. It's going to be difficult by the definitions for out-of-state applicants to qualify as social equity. So that is how the state is giving preferential treatment to Minnesota residents.
Right. Preferential, but just slightly in some more subjective ways. Yeah. Rather than they can't do anything.
Yeah. And we cannot overstate how important local support is. So if the state gets 2 applications and they're for a retail in a particular town, and they submit those 2 applications to the municipality, and the municipality says, yes, they're both zoned right, but this is the one we want, and the town isn't big enough for 2, that local approval is going to go a long way to getting that local business up and running.
Yep, huge. We have another question here. What are the marketing and advertising restrictions for recreational cannabis? There are a few laid out in the statute, not a whole lot of depth in there, but it's mainly what we see in other markets, no advertising to minors, no cartoon shaped edibles, I'm trying to think if there was anything that stood out to me from the marketing and advertising regulate our statutes right now, but I think it
Yeah,
was all mostly what we see in other states.
yeah, and we in other states we've seen everywhere from um, no color. I mean, just very black and white,
Yeah.
to just nothing that appeals to kids. But that'll be in the finer regulations. And I do see we missed a
Yeah.
question in between about the timeline for a retail facility. Um, so the long pole in the tent for a retail facility is pulling any required building permits. I've seen contractors that can come in and completely renovate a building into a viable retail establishment inside 30, 40 days. But like anything else, you're waiting for the right permits. And I've seen that take a lot longer. So I think, with any luck, you'll have a couple months allowed to get your retail facility up and running. And so long as you can navigate the local permits, that's plenty of time.
All right. Looks like we have just about maybe a minute left here. Are there any other questions or any other ones that we missed? Any? All righty. Well, I guess if no other questions, looks like we're pretty much right on time here, and we'll sign off. Thank you all so much for joining the webinar. Really appreciate all of your time and your questions. Reach out if there's anything that we can help with at all. Bob, anything to add?
No, we'll be seeing you across the state of Minnesota over the coming months. Looking forward to it. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, folks. Bye.